So, Impact Wrestling, we have some very interesting Impact Wrestling news. Of course, this past weekend, it's all been about AEW, hasn't it? Of course, AEW Double or Nothing was this past weekend. So, it's been a lot of discussion about AEW. And obviously, when it comes to AEW, you do have to talk a bit about Impact Wrestling because of the working relationship between AEW and Impact Wrestling. So, because of that, there's been a bit of discussion about Don Callis. Now, Don Callis, of course, recently has been a big point of discussion. He always is when it comes to Impact Wrestling, but certainly he has been even more in the last few weeks since the story came out that he is no longer an executive vice president, not only with Anthem Sports and Entertainment, but also with Impact Wrestling. He is no longer an executive with the company. There is debate whether he has any form of responsibilities, even just as a talent with Impact Wrestling. What we do know is that he is no longer an executive with Impact Wrestling. He is no longer an executive with Anthem Sports and Entertainment. Now, it must be stated that Impact Wrestling or Anthem haven't actually confirmed this themselves, but several reputable news outlets have confirmed that that's not the case, and pretty much Tony Khan has almost subtly confirmed this to be accurate as well, because obviously a lot of discussion was about Don Callis no longer being with Impact, and the general consensus was that he was going to sign with AEW. But what was his role going to be with AEW? Of course, we know he's an on-screen talent. He's the manager of Kenny Omega. He's managed the Young Bucks in their matches too. But what else was he going to be doing in AEW? Was he just going to be primarily focused on screen? Was he just going to be a talent? That's it? Or because of his background, working as an executive at Impact Wrestling and his business career in general, was Don Callis going to be working backstage for AEW? Was he going to be a part of the creative process for All Elite Wrestling? What was Don Callis going to do in AEW? Was he just going to be a talent, or was he going to be something else? Well, Tony Khan has kind of subtly and not so subtly confirm what Don Callis has been doing with AEW. Now, Tony Khan has commented on the status of his working relationship with Impact Wrestling and Don Callis' long-term future with AEW. Now, of course, since December last year, Don Callis has been a major part of AEW as Kenny Omega's manager and mouthpiece. But in recent weeks, Don Callis' role has expanded from just Kenny Omega to the Good Brothers, Luke Gallows and Kyle Anderson, and most recently the Young Bucks on AEW television. Now, originally, Don Callis was just presented as an executive vice president of Impact Wrestling, a position that he did previously legitimately hold at the time. Now, it looks like he's strictly a mouthpiece for members of the Elite because he's no longer an executive with the company. He no longer holds any executive position with Impact or Anthem Sports and Entertainment. Now, speaking during the post-show media scrum following AEW Double or Nothing this past weekend, AEW President... Well, this is what I always find funny when I talk about Tony Khan, is he has so many titles at this point. It's President, CEO, Head of Creative, General Manager. I mean, man, talk about those titles. But Tony Khan has clarified Don Callis' current position with All Elite Wrestling, stating that he is a big part of Kenny Omega's current character, and would go as far to say that Don Callis would likely be with Omega for the foreseeable future as a major part of AEW programming. This is what Tony Khan had to say, quote, "Don is a big part of our television. Don's here every week, so Don is with us in AEW. He's a part of the team as Kenny's mouthpiece, Kenny's advisor, and Kenny is on the show every week, so Don is on the show every week and every pay-per-view. As long as Kenny is the champion, Don is a huge part of AEW. Don is an important member of the team here every week." Tony Khan then continued, quote, "I mean, he's been helping behind the scenes. He helps with Kenny's segments and he's involved, and he's a consultant backstage. I mean, that's pretty much the same. He's doing that here, and there was a point where he's been here every week. I think it makes sense. We're doing TV now. We're going back live in a few weeks, so he's going to be here. We got Kenny against Jungle Boy in 2 weeks. Kenny is defending all the titles. He's got the Impact title, the AAA title, and we'll see, but I think he's going to be with Kenny wherever Kenny is. I think Kenny signed here for years, so I think Don will be here for years, like it or not." Interesting. Very, very interesting. Now, obviously, Tony Khan's not giving too much away in his answer there by saying, well, Don Callis, he's here because Kenny Omega's here. I think, look, when you have a working relationship between two promotions, whether it's, AEW and Impact Wrestling, if you've watched Impact Wrestling over the course of the last few weeks, and we don't know if this storyline necessarily is going to be played out, it might have been dropped because the news leaked out when it comes to Anthem and Don Callis and all that, but one would think that I think Impact are going to play up the storyline of, for some reason, Don Callis leaving the company. They're going to find a way to put that into storyline, play on the reality that Don Callis is no longer an executive of the company. They're trying to play that out. How they're going to play that out, I don't know. We've seen the subtle teasers with Don Callis and Scott D'Amore. Maybe they'll figure out a process whereby when Kenny Omega does eventually lose the Unified Impact World Championship, Don Callis kind of goes with him. Not only is it for the Impact World Championship, but the next time you lose a match, Kenny Omega, not only are you going to lose the Impact World Championship, but Don Callis is going to be gone. We are ridding Impact Wrestling of the AEW virus and cancer that is Kenny Omega and Don Callis. And Don Callis, you can no longer be impartial as an executive of the company. I mean, I know they tried to play this up last week, didn't they, with Don Callis making matches? Oh, he's making matches. I'm an EVP round here. I'm a booker. And they're kind of playing that up. So one would think that they're going to get to a point on Impact Wrestling television soon where they say, Don Callis, you can't be impartial. You're no longer an executive. Or next time Kenny Omega loses, not only do you lose, Kenny Omega, but Don Callis loses as well, because he will be fired, because the moment that you are no longer the Impact World Champion, you are not welcome here, and Don Callis, you are not welcome here either. They could do something like that, and I think that's probably the way that they're going to write Don Callis off of television. The only reason at this point that he is involved in Impact Wrestling television is because Kenny Omega is there. That's the only reason he was part of the TV tapings. They were there for 1 day out of the 4 days when they shot TVs for Impact after... when was that? A couple of weeks ago at this point. So that's the situation. Now, as far as AEW, Tony Khan's been a bit coy on that one, I think. He's basically saying, well, he's involved in lots of Kenny Omega stuff, which is true, because obviously he's involved in with Kenny Omega on screen as his manager and his mouthpiece. But to me, that kind of does appear that there is more to it than that. I mean, he's kind of implying there, Tony Khan, that Don Callis is, I mean, he used the phrase a backstage consultant. So I think maybe he's a consultant for Omega. But I would think that if he's going to be involved in matches with the Young Bucks, and obviously he's involved with matches with the Good Brothers as well, I think it becomes more and more obvious that Don Callis is becoming part of the process in AEW. Now, Tony Khan's the booker. Tony Khan's the be-all and end-all in AEW. They're very keen on emphasizing that and stressing that, which is important. Part of WCW's biggest problem over the years, and arguably one of the biggest reasons WCW had the downfall that they did in the late 1990s, early 2000s, is because there wasn't really a boss. Yes, you had Eric Bischoff, as the president. Yes, you had Eric Bischoff is the executive producer, but then Bischoff gets sent home, Russo gets brought in, Bischoff gets brought back. No one knew what was going on, and there wasn't a boss, and Bischoff still had to answer to people higher than him, and they moved things around, and there was Warner Media, Time Warner, AOL, all of that mess. There wasn't really a boss in WCW, in the same vein that there was for Vince McMahon and the WWE. Vince McMahon is the be-all and end-all of WWE. The buck stops with him. He has the final call. He has the final decision. Even today, even if Nick Khan's trying to rebuild that company in his own image, Vince McMahon is still the chairman, he's still the CEO, he still has the final call. And in fairness with AEW, you do have a similar situation with Tony Khan. People can call Tony Khan what they like to call him, whether it's a money mark, whether it's just a mark in general, deluded, an idiot, a fan, whatever, which I think is unfair. It's obvious that Tony Khan is the be-all and end-all when it comes to AEW. He has the final call, he has the final decision, he's the money man, and he's also the booker. People are very keen on emphasizing that while people like Chris Jericho and Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, certainly Cody Rhodes, come up with their own storylines and they pitch things, it's Tony Khan's decision ultimately whether they go ahead with it. And it's Tony Khan's decision about who goes over, who they want to build, who they want to do whatever. Because guess what? In the same vein that it's Vince McMahon's company, it's Tony Khan's company, so it's the same. Now, I think with Don Callis coming in to AEW initially as a talent, Tony Khan describing Don Callis as a backstage consultant in certain circumstances, whether he's just referencing Kenny Omega or the Young Bucks or whatever, I would suggest that Don Callis is probably coming in AEW, they like to call it a coaching role, don't they? Or an advisor role. Obviously, we've just seen that Mark Henry signed with AEW. He's a coaching role. He's also going to be a broadcast analyst for that AEW Rampage show. I think Don Callis is likely the same. I think Don Callis obviously is used on screen as a talent for Kenny Omega, for the Young Bucks, for the Elite. But I think behind the scenes, probably he's going to be used, as I mentioned, as a coach, as an agent, as a producer, whatever phrase you like to use, I think he's going to be involved in that. So I would assume in the same vein as a Dean Malenko, as an Arn Anderson, as a Paul White, as a Mark Henry, as all of those names that are working as producers or coaches, Billy Gunn's another name that works as a coach for AEW, one would assume that Don Callis is probably going to be the same. And look, having Don Callis around is hugely beneficial to AEW. I mean, he's got a great mind for the business. He was on commentary for 2 matches It's Double or Nothing this past weekend. He was on commentary for the Tag Team Championship match between the Young Bucks, Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston. He was also on commentary for parts of the AEW World Championship Triple Threat match. Got also involved in that one by throwing all the championships in with Kenny Omega. So who's to say that when we have this AEW Rampage show later on this year, it debuts in August on TNT, everything moves to TBS next year in January, who's to say that whilst, Mark Henry's an analyst for that show, we know that AEW does like to have a multiple-person booth, more than just two people. They obviously, for Dynamite, they've got Excalibur, Jim Ross, Tony Schiavone. Who's to say for Rampage, they don't have... I don't know who the lead play-by-play person would. If I'm AEW, I'm looking at Mauro Ranallo. I'm looking at Tom Phillips. Who's to say it isn't Mauro Ranallo, Mark Henry, Don Callis? That's an interesting commentary team. It's a very interesting commentary team, isn't it? So that would be fascinating to see where they go in that direction. But look, this is just more of confirmation of what we kind of already know when it comes to Don Callis at this point, that he is no longer an executive with the company, and he is just a talent for Impact because of this working relationship with AEW. In the same vein that at the moment, I think he's just a talent for AEW, but there's more. He is doing more, and obviously there's room to grow there. And that makes a lot of sense. That jives with me, because one of my criticisms in the past when it came to the whole Don Callis situation is I didn't really get, why you would go from an executive position, a senior position in a wrestling company. Granted, Impact's not as big as AEW. They don't have the exposure. They've got the history, but they don't have the exposure or the platform and all that kind of stuff. I wondered why you would go from a position like that where you can't influence the company. You do have a lot of control there. You're obviously, as an employee, one would assume you've got benefits as well. Why would you would go from all of that to going to AEW, working as an independent contractor, working as a talent, not having that, authority, not having that executive status in the company? I just didn't really get why you would do that. It's kind of a step down. There are obviously reasons why you could say, obviously money being one of them. That's an influential factor. Obviously working with Kenny Omega, very close friends of his, working with Chris Jericho on a regular basis. You could argue, well, that's a good reason as to why as well. And look, maybe he's been in that executive position since, 2017? That's 4 years. Maybe he's just a bit tired. Maybe he doesn't want the stress. Maybe he doesn't want the pressure of being in that executive role. Because when you're in an executive role of a pro wrestling company, that's a 7 days a week job. Even in a company like Impact Wrestling, that is all the time. There's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot going on. And maybe he just said, you know what, I enjoy what I do in Impact, but look, I've got an opportunity here to go to a bigger company on a bigger platform, just to be a talent. I don't have the pressure of being an executive or anything like that. I don't have that pressure. I can be close to my friends. I can work with my friends. I'm working with Kenny Omega, Chris Jericho, and I'm having a blast. And maybe I can contribute something backstage and all that kind of stuff, but I don't have to worry about that. That is a compelling reason, I suppose, to leave for Don Callis. That is a compelling reason. So, look, it's obvious now, whilst it hasn't been confirmed, I think the only reason officially it hasn't been confirmed is because I think it's going to turn into a storyline on Impact Wrestling Television. But Don Callis not only is a talent, but he's also a backstage consultant for AEW. So certainly very interesting. As far as replacements go for Impact, I know a lot of you asked me about that before. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that one. As far as I'm aware at the moment, it's still Scott D'Amore, just taking point with it. I know initially they had Don Callis and Scott D'Amore as co-executive vice presidents of Impact Wrestling for Anthem Sports and Entertainment. I don't know if it's just going to be Scott D'Amore just assuming the role that Don Callis had and taking up his responsibilities as well, or if it's going to be a case of someone being elevated into that role that Don Callis once had. I don't know what that would be. I know some people have said Tommy Dreamer. Tommy Dreamer is an influential figure backstage in Impact Wrestling. He is a producer. He is part of the creative team. He is part of the creative process. So maybe he does take some more responsibility. I'm sure it will come out over time. I'm sure reports will come out, and I'm sure people will talk about who takes over for Don Callis, or if it's just Scott D'Amore. All that we know at the moment is that we're about it's June the 1st today, so about a month, 6 weeks or so away from Slammiversary. So Impact are very much focused on everything that's going on with Slammiversary and bringing in new talent at the moment. So a lot's going to happen in Impact Wrestling in the future, not just because Don Callis has left. Now, a couple of things I did want to talk about is Gia Miller has announced that she has signed with Impact Wrestling for 3 years. Impact Wrestling has signed one of its talents to a 3-year contract. Now, as every single wrestling promotion, of course, moves back to being close to touring, moves back to going back to whatever this new normal is, or moving back to an element of normality, we can hope, following the global pandemic. One backstage correspondent in the world of professional wrestling has found a home throughout this time with Impact Wrestling. Gia Miller announced on her Twitter account yesterday, was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday, that she would be staying with Impact Wrestling for the next 3 years. In addition to her duties as a backstage correspondent, she is also one of the hosts of the Before the Impact weekly series that takes place 1 hour before Impact Wrestling. Of course, next week's episode, or this week's episode rather, of Before the Impact will feature the first ever 60-minute Iron Man match in company history as Josh Alexander takes on TJP for the Impact X Division Championship. Obviously, big congratulations to Gia Miller. I think she's good at what she does. It's interesting. 3-year contracts are a significant amount of time for a backstage correspondent. Not just, in other pro wrestling companies, it would be par for the course, but Impact Wrestling's contractual situation is just slightly odd. It's atypical of some of the other companies in pro wrestling right now, and that's you can come into Impact on no contract. Alex Shelley's very openly was like, no, I don't have a contract with Impact. There's an agreement that I'll show up from the taping to taping. It allows me to be flexible. Matt Cardona was kind of the same of going, well, I don't really want to be tied down to a contract, all that kind of stuff. So I don't have a contract right now. Deonna Purrazzo, when she debuted for Impact last year, she didn't have a contract for ages. She didn't have a contract while she was even the Knockouts champion. She came in, worked tapings, won the Knockouts championship, and then later on, she signed a contract. It was the same with Eric Young. Eric Young came in last year at Slammiversary after he was released by WWE, of course, Impact legend. He comes in, doesn't have a contract for ages, sets Impact on fire with his new devious heel character, and he has that amazing feud with Rich Swann, retires, Rich Swann attacks his ankle, all that kind of stuff. He didn't have a contract. Eventually, it got to a point where he got so over that they had to put the Impact World Championship on him. They put the Impact World Championship on him, and then he got a contract because he was over. So Impact have been very, fast and loose when it comes to their contracts. They're very flexible. And on the other side of things, like I said, when it comes to people like Eric Young and the Good Brothers, they signed 2-year contracts when they signed. And that was kind of the pandemic number for Impact is, okay, if we really want to keep you, we'll sign you for 2 years. But now you've got a backstage correspondent, a backstage announcer being signed for 3 years, which is certainly interesting. So there's no doubt here, I think that Impact Wrestling sees something in Gia Miller. I mean, I don't really know if I've noticed her work as much to say that I've gone, wow, she's amazing. I don't know. I don't really... Before the Impact, I'll watch this week, of course, for the X Division Iron Man match, but it's not really a show that I would go out my way to watch anyway. But look, anyone that gets a long-term contract, anyone that can get employment, anyone that can make money in the pro wrestling industry, that's what we're all striving for. So big congratulations to Gia Miller. She's going to be with Impact for the foreseeable future, and what an opportunity for her. Absolutely great opportunity. Finally, I do want to talk, since we're talking about Impact, about a couple of things that have been announced for Impact Wrestling on Access TV this week. Several matches have been confirmed for Thursday's episode of Impact Wrestling on Access TV. One of the matches, of course, is Sami Callihan versus Moose. That comes off their confrontation last week and their tag team main event where they lost to the Good Brothers, so that's interesting. We have the Impact Wrestling Knockouts tag team champions Fire and Flavor going up against Jordan Grace and Rachel Ellering. To be honest, I would be really, really surprised if we don't see a turn in that match. They teased Jordan Grace or Rachel Ellering, specifically more so Jordan Grace turning on Rachel Ellering the last few weeks. Of course, they were the Knockouts Tag Team Champions for just, a couple of weeks, something like that, before they dropped the championships back at Under Siege. I think we're going to see a situation where Jordan Grace turns. I don't know if that's the case. I haven't seen any spoilers, haven't seen any reports or anything like that, but I think that's the likely outcome there. And then Jordan Grace feuds with Rachel Ellering going forward in Impact. Could be wrong, though. We have Satoshi Kojima versus Dina this week. Of course, that's ahead of Kojima's match against Joe Doring at Against All Odds. I'm really, really, really excited for Joe Doring versus Kojima at Against All Odds, because I'll be totally transparent. I don't know. I mean, I know probably the same amount as everyone else does about New Japan Pro Wrestling. More as a casual fan, obviously, I know some of the big names. I watched the Wrestle Kingdoms, the Dominions, those kind of shows. Know about the champions, know about Will Ospreay recently with a neck and all that kind of thing. But I don't know a huge amount on like All Japan Pro Wrestling, all that kind of stuff. And from what I've read up since obviously the announcement was made last week, these two have a ton of history in terms of Kojima and Joe Doring. Obviously, they've got career parallels in Japan. And I'm excited because of the matches that I have watched of that old Japanese style, that in like the 90s and the late 80s, when people used to go there and just beat the hell out of each other. I remember like the first time I saw a Misawa match, I was just flabbergasted by how much they would just beat the hell out of each other, and I loved it, and I love that style. Now, I don't know if we're going to see that here. I don't know if we're going to see a situation where these are just beating the hell out of each other, but I think so. I think it's going to be physical, and I'm fascinated to see how that works out. So Kojima, I would think, one would think Kojima's just going to beat the hell out of Dina on Impact Wrestling this week, which should be fun. We've got a tables match, Rohit Raju versus Jake something, which should be fun. And then, of course, we've got the conclusion of the 60-minute Iron Man match for the X Division Championship, Josh Alexander versus TJP. Now, obviously, I think most people would expect Josh Alexander to win that one. I do. But certainly, we've heard a ton of reports from various people that was at the most recent set of Impact Wrestling TV taping saying that 60-minute Iron Man match is phenomenal. It is something else. So I'm going to be watching before the Impact. I'm going to be watching Impact to see the conclusion of it, to see if it lives up to hype. But everyone there is saying, man, just wait and watch because it's going to be something special. So very excited for that one. Exciting episode of Impact Wrestling this week. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the Impact news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, got the rankings, and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.